Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Frontline. This is Colonel David Giammona on the Battle Ready Network and now on Roku TV and the Remnant Channel with Pastor Todd Coconato. And as always, my co-host, co-author, vice president of Battle Ready Ministries, and all-kind investigative journalist and award-winning author, Troy Anderson. Troy, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Colonel.
And today we have Alex Newman. This is part 2 of what happened to American education and what do we do about it. Alex is an award winner himself. He's an author, prolific writer, speaker, journalist. You name it, Alex does it and does it well. He's featured on many networks around the country and around the world, including Fox. Alex, good to have you on the show today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you, gentlemen. Thank you.
You have the first show, ladies and gentlemen, you got to see it. He has unpacked so much of why we're in the mess we're in today. And we're going to continue that conversation, and we're going to continue about the book on education. But before we do that, Troy, I'm going to turn to you. I know you got some questions for Alex.
Yeah, Alex, on our last episode, you talked about some of the key figures that moved us into this modern public education system, and you also mentioned the Rockefeller family. And I wondered who are some of the powerful behind-the-scenes forces that helped fund this transition from a biblically based education system that we had, from the time that the Pilgrims landed in America until sounds like about the late 1800s, early 1900s, and so who helped finance this and why?
Yeah, the Rockefeller dynasty was absolutely huge. I would say they were some of the most significant players in this. After Rockefeller started getting a lot of bad press, I refer to John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, which eventually got broken up. He was making so much money, he didn't know what to do with it. The papers were getting mad at him. He was being portrayed as a robber baron and all these things. So he set up these philanthropies, and one of them was the General Education Board. And through this philanthropy, he showered millions, and back then millions of dollars was inconceivable sum of money. So he was showering millions of dollars on these efforts to reform education, and it was supposed to look like philanthropy. It was disguised to look like charitable contributions, but what it really was an effort to standardize the citizenry and create little worker bees, little worker drones who would have enough knowledge to kind of like turn the screw on the assembly line or, follow the instructions from their supervisor, but not so much insight and knowledge that they'd start asking real questions or that they'd become entrepreneurial and decide they didn't want to work for Rockefeller. They'd maybe rather start their own company and compete with Rockefeller, right? And so you had a lot of these guys. Certainly the Rockefellers were the most important. Later, the Carnegie family fortune was also instrumental in this. And, some of this actually came out in congressional investigations. There was a really interesting congressional select committee that was put together to investigate the tax-exempt foundations. This was in the late 40s. There was the Reese Committee and the Cox Committee. And the chief investigator for this, Norman Dodd, did some really incredible digging into what was going on here. But if you get their final report, and it's hard to find, but you can still find it on the internet. I've got it in PDF. Don't know exactly where to send people, but you can find it if you look hard enough. Their findings were absolutely extraordinary. They said that there had been a revolution in America in the decades prior to this investigation. And they said this revolution would never have been possible unless education shaped by these, robber barons, as not the term they use, but the term that people know them as, had not used their fortunes to prepare the way in education in advance. And so they attributed this, and notice they said the revolution was in the past, right? And this was in the late 40s, early 50s. They said the revolution had already happened, and that the way the revolution was brought about was through the funding coming from these tax-exempt foundations like the Rockefeller foundations, like the Carnegie foundations, and there were plenty of others, and they reshaped the educational system. And so on the one hand, you have actual communists, people who aren't even scared to say they're communists, people who are going over to the Soviet Union to study this abomination of an education system, and then you have them teaming up with some of the wealthiest men in America to create this abomination disguised as an education system that basically dumbs down the children, that tries to limit their ability to think and to reason, and just turn them into obedient worker drones. So it's a very bizarre fusion of, Marxists, communists, socialists, utopians, and mega capitalists and uber elites that are wealthier than any of us can comprehend. And they are the ones who really built this system, although most Americans had no idea what was going on. And most Americans still to this day have no idea what happened.
Alex, you talk about in your book, crimes of the educated. Is that correct title?
Yeah, that's it. Crimes of the Educators, how utopians are using government schools to destroy America's children.
And that book, and I've read a lot of the excerpts of it, but one of the things that fascinates me is utopia and the utopian society. Why do you talk about that in that book, and what's important? Why do we need to understand that?
Well, utopia is kind of a catch-all term, and the reason we chose it is because to kind of contrast it from the Christian worldview, right? The Christian understanding of human nature, the Christian understanding of reality and life on this planet is very different from the utopian vision, right? Christians understand, first of all, that the heart of man is desperately wicked. Right? We are fallen, we are sinful, and we are inclined toward all evil, at least until Jesus Christ gives us a new heart and redeems us and we're born again. And even still then, we're still struggling with our fleshly, sinful body. And so Christians acknowledge this. And if you don't understand that, look around you. Look at human history. It's been one nonstop horror show of wars and genocides and slaveries and tortures and rapes and killing babies. I mean, it's just one giant horror show. Trust the Bible when it says that the nature of man in this fallen state is absolutely depraved. It's absolutely wicked. In fact, most of the founding fathers were Calvinists. They believed in the total depravity of man, right? We are just absolutely depraved in every sense. The utopians had a different idea. The utopians believed that the reason mankind behaved in these less than optimal ways was because of their surrounding, the environment, the way their parents raised them, the religious system they existed in, right? It wasn't something that was innate to us. It was just because of our surroundings. And so they believed that if we could just adjust certain things in the way the government worked and the way children were raised and educated, that we could build a utopia where there would be peace and harmony and prosperity for everyone. At least that's what they claimed to believe. And so Horace Mann is a good example. He thought that once the government took over education, he believed that 90% of the crimes would just disappear because the government would do such a better job of educating these children than their, old-fashioned, religious, bigoted parents. And you see this attitude today, right? I mean, go talk to an average government school teacher, go talk to a principal, go talk to the people that work at the U.S. Department of Education. They believe that if they could just tweak here and tweak there and, change things around a little bit, that we're going to live in a utopia. And of course, every time these utopians have been given free rein, it always ends in disaster, right? Because you're always, one execution away from utopia, one concentration camp away from utopia. Well, now we got to eliminate these people because they're interfering in the utopia. Oh, these counter-revolutionaries, they're the ones messing it all up. So you always got to keep eliminating more and more people, keep eliminating more and more freedom. And that's what utopians have in common. They have different ideas. Hitler was a utopian. He thought if we, exterminate the Untermenschen and, make sure you have enough Lebensraum for the great German people, that everything would work out fine and there would be this utopia, this 1,000-year Reich, right? And of course, that was nonsense. Chairman Mao was a utopian, right? At least claimed to be. Joseph Stalin, Fidel Castro, they all believed that with just some tweaks in government and education, we're going to build this incredible society, rather than recognizing, as our founding fathers did, that nope, mankind is depraved. You do not want to trust anybody with power. You got to build in checks and balances, because otherwise wicked, depraved men will seize control of these machineries and use them against their fellow man. So that's really the fundamental difference between the Christian worldview and the utopian view.
Well, in our time, I want to really get into this because I think this is the crux of the matter and where I really want to go with the show. We have a problem, Alex, right now, because if, let's say, parents did want to start educating their children at home, they've been educated in the public school system. They don't know the Bible, and they on it goes. So where do we start? Where do we go from here? And what are you involved in to help us get back on track? And where is the American government in the education system? So there's a huge fight right now. What's going on?
There is a huge fight right now. And in fact, as we're speaking right now, the fight is coming to a head in Republican legislatures across the country. We're really at a crossroads right now in America. Millions of families are fleeing the government's indoctrination system, and that is wonderful, wonderful news. But at the same time that families are fleeing, you've got people behind the scenes trying to trap us all back into the system and say, oh, here, just have some free money. And all you got to do is just take all of our tests and report and give us all your data and meet with a navigator. You know, they've got all these traps. They're trying to lure us all back into the system. So you make a very good point. We are now several generations deep into this indoctrination. And, you know, what do you do with that? How does a parent who was indoctrinated, whose own parents were indoctrinated, whose grandparents were indoctrinated, how do we get the ship back on course? And there is no easy answer to that, right? I know people like silver bullets, people like simple solutions. There is no simple solution. This is a multi-generational problem. It emerged because of catastrophic mistakes that we made over 100 years ago. And there's no easy way to solve it. But I think the way to start solving it is for parents and churches to immediately, and I mean immediately, like right this moment, get in your car when you're done listening to this interview, go to the school, pick up your child, tell the principal they're not coming back, and that's it. Right? I mean, right now you need to get it done for us to start ditching this educational system immediately, rapidly as possible. So now, how does a parent homeschool their child who themselves received, I wouldn't even call it an education, but let's just say a substandard education, and that's a challenge. But there are good answers to that. There are now more resources available for homeschool families than at any point in all of human history. It's incredibly encouraging. My wife and I are in the same boat. We've got 5 kids. We homeschool these kids, and both of us received an education that was filled with globalist and communist and secularist and humanist indoctrination. So as we're teaching our children, we're simultaneously learning, right? My wife right now is teaching civics at one of our homeschool co-ops, and she's foreign, right? She doesn't know much about American civics, but she is learning it the night before she teaches it to the children from books that we have vetted, that we know are solid, that we know are grounded in reality, that we know are grounded in the Word of God. And so this is happening all across America. It's happening quietly. You're not going to see much about it on the boob tube. You're not going to read about it on the front page of your paper. But all across this country, there are millions and millions and millions of families in this rapidly growing movement. And, you know, I want to give a shout out to a lot of the Christian schools, too. There's some Christian schools out there that are doing amazing things to restore true, legitimate education as it existed. You know, there's an organization in Virginia that I'm very fond of called the Foundation for American Christian Education. They went back and they tried to study the education that existed at the time of the founding, the education that our founding fathers would have received. And so they've now kind of systematized that, and they're making it available to train teachers, to provide curriculum, to provide school books. So there is a quiet revolution happening in this country in the education field. And, you know, I tell people almost half jokingly, you could put your kid in a closet for 12 years and they'd be better off than sending them to a government school, because at least the closet's not designed to destroy them. And so, you know, I don't recommend anybody do that. It's obviously not a good idea, but sending your children to a government school is an even worse idea. They're going to be sexualized. They're going to be indoctrinated. They're going to be dumbed down. There's a very good chance that they will emerge illiterate. You know, as responsible people, we have to stop allowing this.
Yeah. Troy, over to you, man.
Yeah, Alex, as this movement grows and more people become aware of what's happened in the past with the history you detailed here, and as Republican-led legislatures are pushing, you know, forward, what do you see coming down? What's in store for education in America in the future? What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think families are going to continue leaving the government school system in droves. And this is now crisis levels for a lot of the public school districts. Denver is having to shed, I think, 10 or 12 of their properties because they don't have enough students anymore. Without students, they don't have funding. They literally can't even maintain the infrastructure they have. This is happening all over the country where these school systems are losing huge numbers of children. And so what is happening right now as we speak is an effort masquerading as a conservative or even a Christian solution that, in my view, is going to trap these families, if they go along with it, back into the system. And so, you know, I know that's not popular to say, but I think it needs to be said loudly and clearly. All of these things where the government is offering us money, it comes with strings attached. You know, as I was growing up, my dad always used to say, with federal aid comes federal control. And he meant, like, you know, I'm paying your bills, you better do what I say. But the principle is there. When the government starts funding your homeschool or your private school, your homeschool or your private school will do what the government says. So, I think we need to keep as the goal a restoration of the biblical understanding that parents are responsible for the education of their children, just like parents are responsible for feeding their children and disciplining their children and housing their children and putting their children to bed at night and reading them bedtime stories. So parents need to be the primary ones responsible in the education of their children, and that includes financially as well. Most of us, if we weren't paying thousands of dollars in taxes to pay for these government brainwash camps, it wouldn't be even a big deal to educate our own children, right? So we've got to be aware of that. We do need, I think, more wealthy individuals to step up, because there are, some low-income people. Our families now have been decimated by this disastrous system, to the point where now we have millions of single moms who are struggling to raise their kids. And so, we do need support systems there. And I think that's where the church really needs to play a major, major role here. This is not a responsibility of the government. It really should be the responsibility of parents with a supplemental role of the church. And we need to be very, very alert to these efforts to sucker us back in. I tell people the money that they're offering you is like the cheese in the mousetrap. It looks free, it looks delicious, but it's not free. As soon as you go grab it, you're going to get your skull smashed in. And so there are bills right now all over this country, primarily in Republican states, that are going to offer families free money, or what looks to be free money. But read the details. Okay, UNESCO, the UN's educational agency, has been talking about this. We got to sucker all these families, all these private schools back into the system, and the way to do that is to give them government money. So we need a total separation of school and state. Now, that's the ideal. Where are we actually headed? That's a whole nother question entirely. The way that the establishment, the educational establishment, which is of course connected to the broader establishment that Donald Trump famously called a deep state, the way they want to go is a truly global educational system. And it's not even an educational system. It's to indoctrinate and bring children into world citizenship, one world order. And they say this openly, right? UNESCO decades ago developed what they call the World Core Curriculum. They said it should be taught in every school on planet Earth. It was written by Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Robert Mueller, and peddled by UNESCO for many, many years. You still find it on their website. And in the teacher's manual to this, actually in the foreword, he says that it's based on the teachings of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan teacher Jawal Kul. Well, Alice Bailey was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, right, and Jawal Kul was the demon that Alice Bailey was communicating with. She called it an ascended master or whatever, who was giving her these secret revelations. And so Bill Gates went over and signed a deal with UNESCO in 2004 to create global education standards, global curricula, global teacher training standards, global technology systems. That's the direction they want to go. And this agreement ended up being posted online. 2 years later, Bill Gates comes home and he starts pouring millions of dollars into what we today call Common Core, which was an effort to, on the surface, nationalize education in America, where the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. used bribes, carrots, and sticks to sucker all the states into joining this national education system. And that had already started developing, right, with No Child Left Behind under Bush, where they brought in the testing and accountability. And actually, many of the Common Core ads, I've got some of them myself in my archive, they brag that Common Core unites the American education system with international standards, so that kids in China and Paris and everywhere else will learn the same things from the same standards as American kids. So that's the direction they want to go. They're increasingly bringing in artificial intelligence into this. In 2019, the UN had AI in education meeting in Beijing. So that's the direction they want to go. That's the direction the U.S. government wants to go. And that's the direction, unfortunately, that almost all of our state education systems want to go in as well. But I don't think they're going to get the last word. Families are not going to be brought, I don't think, even kicking and screaming into this abomination of a system. And tens of millions will resist with everything they've got, because, we're talking about our children here. And so, so that's the conflict that's coming. It's coming to a head probably sooner rather than later. And families, you need to be on guard for this.
Alex, we only have a moment left before the show, but what should pastors be doing? I have a friend, in fact, one of our co-hosts, Pastor Coco Perez in West Sacramento, is going to be starting their own school, Christian school on their campus. What do you say to pastors who are listening to this show today?
I say you need to preach the whole counsel of God. Open up your Bible and read what it says about education. Read what it says about discipleship, right? Parents have a sacred responsibility here, right? We talk about the Great Commission and making disciples of all nations and teaching them to obey and baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Holy Spirit. How are you going to make disciples of all nations when you're not discipling your own children, when you're not discipling the members of your own congregation? It's preposterous, the idea that we're going to go make disciples in Africa and Asia and Latin America when we're losing, and the data is clear on this. The Nehemiah Institute has studied this. Something like 80% of Christian children who go through 12 years of government indoctrination are going to leave the faith and they're going to leave the church. So pastors, you have a sacred responsibility to sound the alarm. You need to tell the congregation what the Bible says about parenting, discipleship, and education. You also, I believe, need to tell them in unambiguous terms what's happening in the public schools, because most of them do not know. And if they knew, they would not be tolerating this. And then as a shepherd of God's flock, sub-shepherd under Jesus Christ, you need to then be protecting your congregation to the best of your ability from the wolves that are trying to devour the innocent children in your congregation. And, I can't think of many things that are more important than that right now for pastors to be talking about.
Alex, this isn't going to be the last time we have you on the show. I think people really need to hear the message. Thank God for men like you who are going around and telling the truth to our nation and the people of the world. Tell us about your books. Tell us about your products. How do we get a hold of you? And how do we connect with you?
Well, thank you so much, David. So the big book that I co-wrote on education with Dr. Sam Blumenfeld is called Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Destroying America's Children, using government schools to destroy America's children. You can find that on my website, libertysentinel.org, or you can get it even cheaper at Amazon. I don't know how they sell it cheaper than I do, but they do. So you'll get it signed if you buy it from me. I've got other books as well. Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes is one that I wrote more recently. If people are interested in connecting with us and getting help for the family or the church for getting kids out, we've got a ministry. I'm a volunteer there, even though I've got a fancy title. I'm executive director, but it's Public School Exit. You can find us at publicschoolexit.com. That's enough. I do a lot of things. I've got a few shows that I do, but I really appreciate you gentlemen for having me on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, God bless you. And it won't be the last time we have you on. It's definitely going to be back. We have more to talk about, but I have a last question. I always ask our audience, are you battle ready?
Giammona and Anderson have done it again. They have put together a masterpiece that will inform, enlighten, and challenge your beliefs regarding deception in the end times. This is a must-have book that will guide through the maze of deceit that has blinded the world and confused the church. Dr. Thomas R. Horn, founder and CEO of Skywatch TV,